based. Where are you based at the moment, Francoise?
I am based in California, a bit south of San Francisco.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you for being part of our Mind Medicine Australia advisory panel as well. Your support means a lot to us. So we're going to start off just with a short video for those of you who are new to Mind Medicine Australia, and for those who've seen it before, we hope you enjoy it again. And it's a wonderful resource just to share. It's just 2 minutes, and then we'll have a very short introduction to Mind Medicine, and then we'll start the Q&A with Francoise. And before we do that, we'd like to acknowledge the owners of the lands from which we all come, the elders past and present. We also acknowledge all of the wonderful healers and light keepers who've brought these medicines through the ages to be with us today in probably the greatest time of crisis that certainly all of us would have experienced in terms of the sustainability of our human civilization on this planet now at this point in time is seriously challenged, as you would all recognise. So these medicines could help lead the way forward. So now we'll show the short video.
Did you know that over 45% of Australians will experience mental illness in their lifetime? That's nearly half of us.
Everything feels flat and grey and I don't like it. I feel ashamed.
Mental ill health devastates lives and families and costs Australians around $60 billion a year. Research and treatment expenses continue to rise, yet rates of mental illness indicate that we're losing the battle. New approaches are urgently needed to address this immense suffering and cost. Psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is currently being trialled worldwide and has demonstrated remarkable promise in treating depression, anxiety, addiction, and post-traumatic stress disorder, with new trials underway for treatment of dementia and anorexia. The treatment combines a short program of psychotherapy with just a few medicinal doses of psilocybin or MDMA. In the 1950s and 60s, psychedelic treatments had a major impact in psychiatry, and many considered it the next big thing in mental health treatment. But for political reasons, the Nixon administration criminalised the use of psychedelics and effectively stopped all research. That research has finally begun again. With proper clinical support, psychedelic treatments are safe and frequently lead to remission after only a short program, and even where current treatments have failed. Here at Mind Medicine Australia, we believe everyone should have access to the best treatments for mental illness. We will seek to establish best practice in regulated psychedelic-assisted treatment. Mind Medicine Australia is wholly focused on the clinical application of psychedelic medicines. We're preparing for change by developing therapist training, ethical guidelines, a centre of excellence in psychedelic medicine, educational material and events, and supporting clinical research. We're a small organisation doing big things, and we need your support. Please share this video and visit our website to support us and get involved.
Excellent. And now I'll just go through just a few quick slides about Mind Medicine Australia. If you've got any questions, just post them into the chat and we will try to answer all of your questions during this session. You popping that on the screen, Ilan? Ilan? Hello? Sorry, everyone. Here we are.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I was just frozen for a second.
Okay. The joys of technology. So, bridging Indigenous wisdom and Western psychotherapy today, Francoise Bourzat. Welcome, Francoise. We're very thrilled to have you. Next slide. So, we are focused entirely on the clinical use of these medicines in medically or clinically controlled environments. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available on our YouTube platform and will be sent to all people who've registered for this session as well, along with other information that will come out of this session. Next slide. Next slide. So pre-COVID, these were our mental health stats in Australia, which placed us only ahead of Iceland, as second worst in the world mental health statistics. 1 in 5 Australian adults with a chronic mental illness, 1 in 8 Australians on antidepressants, including 1 in 4 older Australians, 1 in 30 children as young as 4 years of age, being prescribed with psychiatric medications. It's now believed and suggested by many mental health experts that as many as 1 in 3 Australians could be suffering from a mental illness in Australia. So we have a serious mental health emergency at the moment in Australia as a result of the ongoing lockdowns and the other stresses and trauma that are being exacerbated by this pandemic. And some mental health experts like Professor Patrick McGorry says there's a seriously huge crisis, a shadow pandemic, which follows in the wake of the pandemic and which has unfortunately the potential to affect people not only for their whole lives, but to affect them multi-generationally as well. If we can ask every participant to go on mute. Ilan, could you make sure that everyone is on mute? Thank you. So the elephant in the room been unmuted as sorry. Here we go again. Can you all hear me? A few technical issues today. Great. So the elephant in the room, you can see the big elephant there, is the lack of treatments for mental illness, lack of effective treatments for mental illness. And you can see the elephant there is trying to get the attention of all those bureaucrats and politicians and everyone else just to say, hey, we're not going to get more people well and out of the system if we don't have new treatments. We can create patient access gateways, we can create more telehealth sessions, we can train more psychologists and doctors and psychiatrists. But if we don't have the treatments, we can't get people well. Next slide, thanks. And there's been no improvement in treatment outcomes over the past 50 years. So in the case of depression, only a maximum of 35% of sufferers experience remission from current treatments or psychotherapy. Side effects can be very serious for a lot of people. And in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder, only as few as 5% of patients go into remission from existing treatments. So more of the same won't solve the problem. Next slide. Back one, please. Oh, is that the next one? Yeah. So we're a charity that's been set up to alleviate the suffering caused by mental illness through expanding the treatment options available to medical practitioners and their patients. Our focus at the moment is on medicinal psilocybin for the treatment of depression and MDMA for the treatment of PTSD. However, we're also interested in other psychedelic medicines and the treatment of other conditions, which are being trialled around the world. For us, success means that these therapies become an integral part of our mental health system. That if you go to the doctor, you'll be given the choice of current existing psychiatric medications, psychotherapy, and psychedelic assisted therapies, with full disclosure on the risks and benefits of each type of treatment. Also, that the high remission rates of 60 to 80% will continue to be achieved, and that will lead to a significant improvement in our mental health statistics. And finally, and most importantly, that these treatments are accessible and affordable to all Australians, no matter where they're based or their financial circumstances. Next slide. So the remarkable thing about these treatments is they only require 2 to 3 medicinal sessions with a short course of psychotherapy, versus for what many people is a lifetime of psychiatric medications and or psychotherapy. The medicines are considered curative, not palliative. They actually do get people well and out of the system. And they're very safe in medically controlled environments and non-addictive. Both have been granted breakthrough therapy designation, which is only granted to medicines that are considered vastly superior to existing treatments, and to fast track the approval process so that when they go through phase 3 trials, they'll be instantly prescribable. Next slide. So I love this slide. It really explains a little bit about psilocybin and its function in the brain. So the wonderful thing about psilocybin is it bypasses what's called the default mode network of our brain, which tends to keep us stuck and defaulting to our same patterns and programs, rigid and stuck ways of thinking that often come from childhood. And you can see this represented on these fMRI scans. On the right, a patient with depression, that's the placebo. You can see the very limited neural connectivity. We saw on that video the patient saying things like, I'm not good enough, things won't work out, my life is terrible, etc., etc. And you can see how the brain there on the right is really not connecting very well at all. Whereas on the left, you have this massive neurogenesis, this increased neuroplasticity, this sense of connection and oneness. And the remarkable thing about those diagrams is there is the same amount of lines in both. One is just in a brain that's really working well, and the other is in a brain that is stuck. And so what these medicines do is they really help us to reset or reboot the hard drive, to defrag the dodgy disk, and to promote a form of active coping so that we become empowered for our own healing and don't just rely on a daily pill that reminds us that we have a mental illness. We actually get well. We get well, we get connected, and we get out of the system. And it's important to say that, you know, one of the real definitions of depression and other mental illnesses is a sense of disconnection, of separation, of isolation. So to be given the chance to actually reconnect to yourself, to others, to the planet is really profound. And of course, many patients who have these treatments describe it as one of the most meaningful experiences in their lives. Now, whoever says that about a medicine normally. So we'll go to the next slide. We also want to talk about two very, very important recent trials. This one from Imperial College that compared directly psilocybin, just 2 doses of psilocybin with a short course of psychotherapy versus a daily dose of escitalopram, an antidepressant, over the course of 6 weeks with a short course of psychotherapy as well. Remission rates were twice as high in the psilocybin group as the antidepressant group. Plus, there were fewer side effects, less suicidal ideation. That was a significant trial by Imperial College. We also acknowledge the Part 1 Phase 3 trials by MAPS, which show that 67% of participants who received just 3 MDMA-assisted therapy sessions with a short course of psychotherapy no longer qualified for a diagnosis of PTSD, and they've been suffering with PTSD for an average of 14 years. So imagine their suffering. And 88% of those patients experienced a clinically meaningful reduction in symptoms. It's expected that those remission rates could get up to 80% as the patients undergo further integration. I'm sure that Francoise is going to talk about the importance of integration with these medicines, aren't you, Francoise?
Oh, yeah.
All right, next slide, thank you. So I should say just before we show this slide that this whole field is gaining enormous momentum. We've just seen the Australian government, which announced a $15 million grant for further research and development, which is the largest federal government grant in the world. As well, we're seeing many places like the state of Oregon legalizing the use of psilocybin for therapy. We're also seeing Canada legalizing psilocybin for end-of-life treatment and for PTSD. We're also seeing these medicines being trialled for a whole range of other conditions, a range of addictions, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders, stroke, Parkinson's. Now we're starting to even see people starting to look at schizophrenia, cluster headaches, fibromyalgia. It's really incredible how this field is burgeoning. And I should say to all of you that, you know, our focus here at Mind Medicine Australia is to build the ecosystem so that these medicines can become accessible and available as soon as possible through the medical system. We do that through 4 key strategic pillars. The first is awareness and knowledge building, so education and events like these. So this is our wonderful free global webinar series. We also partner with a lot of organisations. So if you are from an organisation and would like to partner with us to educate your team or your company, your clinic, please let us know. We present to hospitals, clinical groups, universities, businesses, insurers all the time. We also have our major international medical summit in November, and we've just announced that it is going to go virtual, which means that we can retain all of our wonderful lineup of international speakers, and we can ensure that we can make that event accessible to people regardless of border and other restrictions. So we're very excited about that because it means we can have people like Francoise also speaking at that. We also have over 30 chapters around Australia and a chapter in New Zealand as well. So we invite you to join a chapter, or if there's not one near you, start one up, and we'll help you with that and talk further about that afterwards. We've also started the very first certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies in the Southern Hemisphere. And our first intake graduated in May, and our second intake is halfway through. There's a few students from that course and graduates from the first intake on this call. So we welcome psychologists, psychiatrists, GPs, physicians, social workers, psychotherapists, social workers, did I say that? Occupational therapists, nurses, paramedics, and so on, counsellors, to register for that course. We have a world-class faculty, and Francoise has just joined that faculty as well. We also are looking at setting up the first Asia-Pacific Centre in Emerging Mental Health Therapies for applied research and development in partnership with universities, manufacturing of the medicines, and we're looking at the preferred legal and ethical framework. So as many of you know, we applied to RTGA, our regulators, to reschedule psilocybin and MDMA from Schedule 9 prohibited substance to Schedule 8 controlled medicine. And those submissions are currently being reviewed by an independent panel, which will report on September the 30th. And then we hope and pray that those medicines will be rescheduled, because a number of psychiatrists and doctors in Australia have gained what are called SASB approvals for patients who are treatment resistant, many of whom are very ill, and some of whom are suicidal, some of whom are veterans. And those patients need urgent treatment. So the TGA has actually been granting federal approvals for the treatment of those patients. But because of our federal system, the states are still blocking access for the medicines to come in and treat those patients, which is pretty much a travesty of human rights, because those patients need those treatments. And it seems terrible that we have a system in Australia where, you know, we have a federal approval, but unfortunately people are not being able to be treated. So we're working very hard on all these challenges. We're also looking at clinical rollouts. So with that, I'm now thrilled, next slide please, to introduce Francoise. Oh, no, and firstly say to all of you, while our webinars are free of charge, we do encourage you to make a donation. Small to large, all are welcome. We can't do this alone. And if it weren't for the hundreds of donors and supporters that we have, we wouldn't be able to do these incredible events and have these extraordinary people presenting to you. We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing to make these medicines available. As many of you would know, Peter and I are philanthropists. Peter Hunt is my husband. We donate all of our time and money to this charity to try and make sure that these medicines can become available to those who are suffering and to prevent further suicide. So with that, we're going to open up the screen, put Francoise and I spotlit, and we will start to answer your questions as we can as well. But let's start, Francoise, with how you got into this field, and tell us a little bit about yourself. That would be wonderful.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you for this great presentation. It's good for me to see what's going on in Australia, because it's so far away from my reality, and it's good to touch base and see really what you guys are forging in your country. So thank you.
Thank you. No.
So I'm French, as you guessed. I was born and raised near Paris, and moved in the United States in 1981 when I was 25. So this is kind of, you know, my beginning. What introduced me to this field of mind expanding sacred medicine is when I was in South America. When I was 19 and 20, I was traveling for 9 months hitchhiking through the Americas. You know, this was the time, mid 70s, and I had the opportunity to partake to a ritual involving San Pedro cactus, the Huachuma cactus, mescaline-containing cactus, in its environment with the local people, the Aymara people who were living there. And this first entry into this reality of expanded consciousness was really, really important for me. I mean, it was really my doors of perception being really opened in that, literally, and in that experience. You know, it's a long experience. It's like 16 hours of being in that state. So that made an impression for a while, certainly. And I have to say, I remember that that day like it was yesterday. It's very, very branded in my psyche and memory. I was not very much an experimenter of drugs. You know, I didn't go to festival and get high and take LSD very much. I mean, just here and there a couple of times. But when I came to California in 81, it took me a couple of years to find my orientation and develop my own path as a body worker, healer, and a dancer. I was also studying modern dance. And then I met a group of people who were involved in medicine work. That was like 84, just when MDMA was starting to become illegal. And you know, the Shulgins had been manufacturing, and there was a lot of incredible activity. And Timothy Leary was around, and Ralph Metzner was, you know, teaching at CIIS, and was my husband's professor actually, and his dissertation committee chair. Anyway, this was the time of the psychedelics being, on one hand, very, very controlled and going sort of really, really underground, but also there was a lot of activity and a lot of conversation happening way before ayahuasca came on the picture. There was really not the time, but Stan Grof was very active in allotropic breathwork and all these activities, and we were, my fiancé, soon to be husband, and I were very much circulating around CIIS and studying there, him doing his PhD in clinical psychology and me in my master's degree in somatic psychology. We were also involved, parallel to that, with a man named Pablo Sanchez. He's a Pueblo Navajo First Nation person, as well as Mexican from his father's side. And Pablo had been pioneering a method which turns out to be very much what, Tanya, you're talking about, except it was done sort of in this living room. But it was a method of psychotherapy, very, very, very academic psychotherapy. He was a professor of Jungian psychoanalytical theories in the university, as well as a social worker and a very interesting Renaissance man. And he was conducting this therapy that was combining the therapeutic approach and psychedelics. So that would be MDMA, LSD, mushrooms. There was some ketamine. There was some MDA, 2CB. These were the medicines that we would work with. And so we would do these individual journeys, we call them, and then sometimes these group journeys. There was assistance, and we became assistant, and we were sometimes doing the work, sometimes assisting and developing this knowledge in a way of what Pablo and his also friend Salvador Roquette, who is a pioneer in the ketamine field, had been creating. And we felt very, very lucky, and I felt very lucky to become Pablo's right arm of sort, my husband too, of course, and at the same time working very closely with Ralph Metzner, who was exploring psychedelics very much and being a very dear person in our lives for over 30 years. since this first encounter at CIS in the 80s. So I became involved in this field of psychedelics at that time and continued to work with Pablo as his assistant. I started to be a therapist myself and would bring my client to Pablo, and we would work together because I was not sure how to navigate the whole legality aspect and what that meant, because that was basically illegal work. But it was so potent, and it was so efficient, and it was so well done and beautifully held that I felt, this is something I'm really wanting to continue, but it was difficult. And then I had the opportunity to travel to Mexico, and that really changed my life, because now I was connected with this woman, Julieta Casimiro Estrada, who was a Mazatec elder in the tradition of the sacred mushrooms, and she had been born and raised and worked in that tradition for many, many years. The entire town and mountain was organized around the respectful use and sacred use of mushrooms as their native practice of healing, of doctoring, and praying. And I became very close to her. And for the next 20 years, we collaborated together. I traveled there many, many times. She came to California and Europe, and we visited my family everywhere. And it was really a wonderful relationship and mentorship and friendship and family life. And she passed away 3 years ago. And my work continues with her daughter, Eugenia Pineda, who is a wonderful healer herself, continuing the tradition of the sacred mushrooms. So then I started to really involve myself very deeply in that study, trying to understand the best I can this very mysterious practice around mushroom, now called psilocybin for the broader world. But it's been a wonderful experience. And then I started to teach at CIS a course called, what was it called? Expanded States of Consciousness in Psychotherapy. And I started to present in Moscow at a conference, and in France and in Lebanon and Israel, at different places. I started to speak about this Mazatec approach, because there was a lot of interest in understanding what this indigenous group was doing, and how they were believing in the power of this medicine, and how they were conducting the ceremonies, or their cosmology, essentially. So I became more of a teacher. I still went to Mexico and took all my people there. I trained guides. I've been training psychedelic guides for 25 years. I believe this is something I had to do to pass on what I knew and what I had gathered. So I've been training hundreds of psychedelic guides over these years. And which we train them, in didactic manner, and then of course go to Mexico and now Jamaica to work there and be able to practice and ingest and sit for each other and watch the work and do something that's possible. I've been also involved in Oregon. I was a part of the advisory board for the campaign in the Proposition 109. With Robin Carhart-Harris and Paul Stamets and Mark Eden and different people. I was there for the election celebration, the night of the election. We had a great time. And now we are, my center, which is Center for Consciousness Medicine, my training center, we're involved with the Oregon Health Administration to advise them, hopefully, to the right criteria that would constitute a training for the facilitators of this mushroom and psilocybin offerings. I don't want to call it treatment necessarily, because there's not a clinical setting, experiences. So I'm involved in that, and I'm working different projects of training palliative care physician in Canada right now through TheraSeal. We are starting a training next week for their professionals to be able to deliver mushroom to people who receive an exemption from the government in palliative care. And I'm doing and then I'm doing a training and offering of retreats in Jamaica for bereaved parents. There has been an evolution in my work that has gathered some, strangely, but obviously, some parents who have lost children due to suicide, overdose, or illness. And with a team of physicians and psychologists, we have created this retreats for bereaved parents in Jamaica with a lot of context around that. Of course, preparation and a lot of integration. And so we're training now a group of psychologists and already guides trained by myself to run those retreats. So lots of things and a lot of activities, as you see, ongoingly unfolding. Yeah.
Wow, you've got your fingers in a lot of places. It's really, really wonderful to hear about that. Our next question here is, what are the main pillars of your knowledge about psychotherapy, about the psychedelic psychotherapy? Like, what is it that's your real core expertise, and what makes your skills so valuable and important in this field?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the first pillar for me is personal experience, right? I believe that this is not a technique. This is a knowledge, and to be able to offer a space that is safe, that is informed, and that is deeply resonant with the energetic field in a way, because it's a little delicate and subtle. The practitioner or the facilitators or the guide, depending what we call the person, has to have had experiences themselves in the format that is offered. So a lot of people, have had experiences on their own, or in festivals, or in an guided or in clinical setting. And it doesn't necessarily provide the kind of environment that is highly beneficial for someone in a grief situation, or in an addiction situation, or in a depressed state, or an anxious state, or recovering from trauma. So such environment has to be really, really well guided by a person who has done their own work with the medicine that they are actually offering to their client. The other pillar is a psychological training. Everybody we train is trained psychologically. And even the physicians who come to us for asking for training, we send them to psychotherapy school, because physicians are not necessarily psychologically trained. They might be really excellent in their field and have a lot of compassion for people's illness, but it's not necessarily prepare them for the complexity of the psychological territory that can happen in a case of a grieving parent or someone with sexual trauma. So we don't necessarily accept physicians necessarily, or nurses. Everybody has to have a psychological training. So that's important. That's the second place. And then the third thing that I think is really important in all this approach is the very important themes of preparation and integration. It's complicated to deliver such important and deep dive without the context of very good support and a very good rapport with the guide that is facilitating the process, and a follow-up. So, there's in the field now, there's more and more a reduction of that human process and human buffer around these experiences with psychedelics, which is a bit regrettable, not. Like I'm involved in a study, an FDA-approved study near Los Angeles for people suffering for COVID-related grief, and we are making sure that people have 6 months of therapy after the ingestion of the psilocybin, actually, because we believe that this is really important to provide the aftercare on a longer basis. So that's those are the three things: the experience, the psychological training, and the training, of course, psychological training, and then preparation, integration. The three main facets of what makes this work really possible for me.
Wonderful. And can you share with us what is the role of Indigenous wisdom in this work? We get such a lot of questions from people saying, well, if we're bringing these medicines into clinical environments, then we're going to lose all that Indigenous heritage that, really this is why these medicines have come to where they are today. So what is the role of Indigenous wisdom in this work, particularly in a more clinical environment?
Well, I mean, my immersion into this Mazatec tradition is minimal, right? I'm not an Indigenous person. I can speak for them. I have been given, the blessing and permission to translate some of their work and some of their belief and some of their ways into my social group and in my trainings and in my narrative. So just want to say, first of all, I'm not like taking something. I'm just given permission to speak, not on their behalf, certainly, but my version of what I've understood of their tradition. Indigenous wisdom, as I understand it, as I've witnessed and understood it, has to do for me with the collective, has to do with the culture that surrounds the practice. So, in our culture here, obviously the psychedelic practice is very insulated. It's very, well, it's taboo still, right? It's very judged. It's very alternative, if that, right? I mean, less and less in the United States now, but as you know, in your country, it's a process, right? Whereas in the Indigenous culture, the entire culture is aligned and approving and supporting and anchored into the practice with sacred medicine, may it be mushrooms or salvia divinorum or morning glory seeds or datura or whatever they use in Mexico, for example. But even in South America, the Amazonian tradition is very much centered, not all Amazonian traditions, but the one practicing ayahuasca, the entire village practices ayahuasca, or the town or the country. So there is a legitimacy and a field that is very constantly mirroring back the acceptance and the shared experience. So I think that the Indigenous wisdom has to do with the fact that we have a collective which is aligned and totally aware of everything, and that's very helpful to lower the amount of fear and shame and isolation. So that's a strong Indigenous belief. The other Indigenous belief that I think is important is the relationship with the natural world. In Mexico, where I go, the mushroom obviously is a fresh mushroom. It's gathered from the land. It's brought to the ceremonial leader. It is very, very respective. It's never brought in open air in the street. It's always wrapped. It's always brought like a sacred medicine. And it is connected with the spirit of Mother Earth and her wisdom and her richness of creation. And in ceremonies, the elementals, the cardinal points, the wisdom of earth and entities and animals and plants are always called as part of the environment that provides the ritual and provides the healing. And I think that in a lot of this psychotherapy, like psychedelic assisted therapy, there's not a lot of that, right? There's not a lot of this consideration. I mean, yeah, it's clinical. I mean, I know it in Los Angeles in the study we're doing, we're starting to do. They actually are writing in the FDA application that there would be a ceremonial and ritual aspect in the FDA application, because I'm part of it, and that's why I'm bringing in this study, and that's the first ever that has been written like this. So we'll see how that goes with the FDA, but that's really interesting because that's going to be bringing a different element of ritual, of sacredness, of making an altar, and just the fact that I'm, well, that's my practice, that's what I know, that's the way I do this work, would be part of what the room is infused with, right? By definition, when I'm guiding this work there in that room, that my personal resonance with that tradition and my personal practice and my journeys will be also present there. And so that's the interesting piece of that. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. There's a question here from Nicole then saying, hang on, sorry, another one. Yeah. Wouldn't this then indicate a community-centered healing approach, educating community members how to take care of their own, in contrast to continuing the fragmentation inherent to allopathic and clinical medicine?
I totally agree, Nicole. This is a very big thing. Again, this is the Indigenous. I don't know. I mean, it's not Indigenous. I mean, we've been in tribes, we've been in families, we've been in community. I mean, this is a community. This is a collective right here. So, creating a collective like you're doing, Tanya, is really the key here for this solidarity, for feeling like we're in there together. Everybody has some skills and interesting nature to contribute. So, the collective is not something that doesn't exist. It's just kind of brought out of the clinical setting. And that's really a shame in a way. In UCSF in San Francisco, a friend of mine who is a psilocybin researcher, a psychiatrist friend of mine named Brian Anderson, maybe you know of him, he's been doing I forgot exactly what was the theme of his study, but he's been doing a study of individual journeys with psilocybin, but all the preparation and integration are done in group. So there is the presence of the collective that's there as a support system. So even though the journeys are done individually, because, well, I guess they weren't sure how that would go, and there was a first entry to the idea of the collective, it really showed an amazing efficacy of ongoing support, and the fact that they all knew how to prepare together, and then they all shared the same intention in a way, and then they were together on the other side of their journeys. Was very, very promising. And so I think that we're going back into or in the direction of more collective. I was recently talking with Rick Dublin, in fact, about that when we did the taping for Gabor Mate's Wisdom of Trauma, and Rick was saying how the field of psychedelic assisted therapy has to go back to the indigenous manner of doing this healing as a group, because it's more real. We heal better as a group. We heal better in resonance, and we support one another. And that really brings a lot to the healing process. And it's cheaper. I mean, it's cheaper. Let's face it, these treatments can be really expensive and not really easy to access. And if we want a quality of treatment, we need to have a better context without sacrificing the care, So I think the group is definitely the avenue of the future.
No, absolutely. I mean, and it's very interesting, actually. I think there's quite a few therapists, a lot of therapists on this call. And many people who are doing our CPAT course know that we're at the moment working on developing a healthy patients trial for therapists to participate in. And what is really interesting about that trial is that they will be going through these treatments in groups of 6. And I mean, how wonderful would it be, to have that loving and caring support from other fellow therapists. I'd love to be a fly on the wall. I think would be really wonderful, but everyone bringing their own collective, energy and spiritual roots, because we all have, we all have the ancestral line through each of us. We all actually carrying all of this with us. So I think
that's true. I mean, working in a group is really essential, I think. I mean, right now I was this group of there's a group of physicians, a palliative care physician. We are developing these retreats to do in Jamaica soon for physicians who are totally burned out with the COVID pandemic. I mean, they are so fried. They are so exhausted, and they've seen so many deaths. They've been on the front line, and they are so burnt out, and they're exhausted, and they're depleted spiritually, and they're traumatized essentially. And so we're trying to organize a group of those physicians who are actually doing I think some of them are doing the CPTR program from CIS on the East Coast, and we're bringing them to Jamaica to do some retreats there. And we're kind of hold them while they're doing their communal work as physicians, because they know what they're going through. When we did the retreat with the parents, we held the group and we did the ceremony with the mushroom. It was very meaningful. And the parents held each other. They all had the same story, they had the same grief and horrible situations, and they were like really understanding each other. And I mean, that's 50% of the healing. I mean, that's really 50% of the healing. So, I believe in the collective healing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Kylie here says, we need our Indigenous allies to work with us and alongside us, not above or below us. Absolutely, Kylie. To champion the wisdom held within and extend it out to the wider population with the blessing of First Nations people. The earth is all our mother. Absolutely. What a beautiful way of putting that. Dale here says, what are the main techniques used by your psilocybin therapist during the session when it's mainly the mushroom doing the work?
Well, I always say that it's a collaboration between the journeyer or the client. I don't know what we call the patient. I don't know. I'm not very much into the medical model, but the client, the medicine, and the guide. Because it is very much the medicine and the client, of course. But again, I've observed over the years that the container and the context is so important, that if the guide is not experienced, so doesn't know what they're doing, or is going to be afraid in a situation, or has not even done the work, the place of, again, it's kind of a bit of it sounds a bit new agey, but when we're in those places, the unconsciouses are speaking. So the unconscious of the person, the journeyer, and the unconscious of the guides are in total communication, and they read each other and they feel each other. And if the journeyer feels that the guide doesn't know what they're doing, the level of safety and the level of boldness in surrendering into the space is very compromised, or is limited, or unsafe. And either so I think that the guide is important. I mean, if I didn't believe that, I don't think I would train people the way I train people. I mean, I would not bother, but I really believe that. I've seen that over the years. So it's not just the medicine. And there is a way that the journeyer enters the work because of their calling, because of their courage, because of their determination to go the distance and to face their fear or their trauma. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of of determination to really go into those spaces. It's an amazing gift that someone gives themselves, the capacity to even access those journeys, to look for them, to prepare for them, to integrate after, and to do the work that is needed on the other side. It's a lot of commitment. And people who come to work with me, I say, well, if you want to do the psychedelic work, it's a collaboration. I'm not going to do it for you, and the medicine is not going to do it for you. Ultimately, it's going to be your choice. I mean, yes, you surrender during the journey and you are sort of taken over, but you still have agency in your life. You still make the decision. You still decide if you're going to drink on the other side or not. It's still going to be in your hands. I mean, you're still going to have to maintain the insight or the healing you've received. So it's very much it's kind of a nice collaboration.
So, well, you're giving us some wonderful insights into especially this bridge between the divide between Indigenous wisdom and Western psychotherapy. And there was a question here about, what do we know about the Australian Indigenous medicines? And the answer to that is that we have reached out a lot to some of the Indigenous groups in Australia. And of course, all of us in Australia would know that acacia, for example, which is a Indigenous plant has DMT in it. And of course that many of the Indigenous paintings that we see in the song lines, you know, really reflect those sort of altered states. But it's quite difficult to find Indigenous people in Australia who want to speak about these traditions publicly, perhaps because they're afraid that, you know, they might be stopped from doing what they're doing, or, you know, I'm not really sure, but, you know, it's a sensitive area. But we are doing everything we can to work with the Indigenous people in Australia and to connect some of those dots without compromising, you know, the sacred nature of their own traditions. We respect traditions. So
yeah.
Well,
you know, and they have a lot of you know, I mean, I totally hear you, and I'm hoping you can create a good healthy alliances with people who would share their knowledge and trust. And but, you know, historically that has been a disaster, right? Everywhere the Indigenous people have given their knowledge, it's been taken away and stolen and colonialized, and there's been nothing given back. And, you know, it's a disaster everywhere around the world. Yeah. So the white people, we don't have a very good reputation as far as First Nation people go, you know? So, but, you know, and then, I mean, look at me, you know, I went there, I was like this little French girl from California. I had no ambition. And then somehow it worked, or it, I don't know what, it connected, but I'm a one person with one person. So that's different. You know, I was not. No,
absolutely. And there's some wonderful shamans, you know, underground healers in Australia who have worked with many of the leading traditions in Peru and other places, Mexico, around the world, and they've also been given those rights in a sense. And
that's great. That's
so,
great.
you know, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful privilege to have people like you that have this ancient wisdom and can bring it to heal those who are suffering.
That's right.
I have a question for you about your book. So I have your book, wonderful book, everyone. I'm sure Ilan will put a link to it in the chat. But tell us about the holistic model your book is centered on.
Well, it's you know, it's not like a very you know, complex or abstract or whatever creation. What happened is, you know, that the culture of psychotherapy has evolved from being a mind exercise, and the exercise of revealing the subconscious through dreams and such, to being more connected with the physical experience, right? So that has gone from mind to mind-body, right? The mind-body connection. And people realized that there was some illnesses or physical contraction that were due to psychosomatic, we call it, right? Psychosomatic. So it's connected. It's psychological and somatic. So people started to look about relaxation technique and massage and exercise as a source of health from an emotional standpoint. And then the spiritual standpoint came on the picture too. People realized that the practice of spiritual ritual or a spiritual component in one's life was actually beneficial both for their physical health and for their emotional health as well. So the idea of mindful practices, of earth practices, different aspect of spiritual dimension was actually started to be included. And so now we have a mind, body, spirit, right? We have this axis of mind, body, spirit, which we all have assimilated pretty much as mainstream in the field of healing and psychology and health in general. But it was very individualistically based. It's me, about me, with my body, my spirit. It's it's kind of a narcissistic orientation, we may say. It's good, it's valid, but it's a bit limited, right? It's not real, because in reality, we have relationships. In reality, we have a society. And in reality, we have an environment and we have nature. And so the aspect of collective and environment felt for me that it was those two elements that I spoke earlier as a in a way gifts from the Indigenous people, from First Nation people. What they have their tribe and they have their land, right? And their ritual and spirituality connected with the land. So the bond with the land and the bond with the tribe was what was missing in the psychotherapeutic framework of individual well-being. And so by bringing these two other elements into this monolithical, individual framework was this weaving of indigenous practice or indigenous gifts into the Western psychotherapy gifts, right? And bringing that together in the holistic model. So the holistic model is what creates holistic health, right? And it's based on body, mind, spirit, community, and environment. So when these 5 aspects are cared for, paid attention to, balanced, prepared for before a journey, and integrated in after a journey, when all these 5 aspects are actually an ongoing baseline where life stands, then there is most likely a better life situation, because there is healthy, there is intentionally healthy body, well cared for. There is an awareness of the emotional and unconscious process. There is a resource and connection with spirit as a fuel and as a safe haven, and as a, the connection with the mystery, which is a lot what psychedelics bring us to. And there is an awareness to the collective and where we belong as a physical body around other people. And then there is a connection with the earth and the home, the place where we all come from and we all go back to, and all that, so this create the holistic model that is, well, that's a 5 aspect of the model. And then the model is also infused by 3 qualities, which I realized were actually later on, or not later on, but as I was thinking this model, I realized that actually Maria Sabina, who was very much the beginner of all this mushroom work for the white people, was talking a lot about clarity and tenderness. This was her prayer. She said, this is a matter of clarity. This is a matter of tenderness. And she was talking about wisdom, right? So the qualities that I like to talk about is wisdom, creativity, and love. So you have wisdom, is clarity, is seeing the truth for what it is, being clear with what you know, what you realize you don't know, what is working well in your aspects, what's not working so well. So that's clarity, that's wisdom, right? That knowing. And then there is creativity, the power to change, the power of human agency over one's life. I can change something. I can decide to do something differently. I have the capacity to transform my life. I make choices. I do a journey, or I go on a fast, or I go to meditate, or I call a friend. This is the creativity moment that really creates the changes. But then there is tenderness. And Maria Sabina, even though she was really a pistol and she was really apparently very, very stern and not extremely fun, but she was also talking about love, because none of that can happen in a place of judgment. None of this balancing, none of this looking at one's life, and none of this transformation with journeys and with, whatever we do in life can happen if we don't have love, if we don't have a place of tenderness and being nice with ourselves, about all this, because it's complicated. Like you said, we all doing our best here, but it's not easy always. So that's the model. That's the model. This aspect, these qualities, for the sake of consciousness. For the sake of wellness, on a big picture, wellness.
Well, that's just a beautiful way of expressing that. I'm just going to go through a couple of questions. There's so many questions here. Hang on a moment. Judy. Oh, so, all the different psychotherapeutic models. Is there any particular ones that you think are particularly helpful for those who are wanting to work in this space or working in this space? like, you know, some of the other complementary models around somatic therapies and, you know, trauma and so on. There's a lot.
Well, there is a great model that actually is taught in Australia, because a friend of mine goes there to teach it. I know that is the Hakomi model. Hakomi, Hakomi. There's an institute in Australia. I know she comes to teach there, my friend Manuela, and it's a wonderful model because it is based in a lot of compassion, clear looking, and really observing how we organize our emotion on a physical level and how we can transform. What is the process of transforming, identifying our belief system, identifying where they come from, what is a conversation we have internally. So it's based in Gestalt therapy originally, you know, IFS, you know, like this internal family system, Gestalt, inner dialogue, you know, parts work. And so it's really based in what is the conversation that's going on inside me, and who are these parts? And once you start to identify this different layer of conversation and people, you start to have more awareness and more choices. So it's a process of consciousness. And so Hakomi method, Hakomi Institute, it's a really good, I think it's a really good method that's very adequate, adapted for being in such a space, because it has a lot of, again, mindfulness, and the tone is very attentive and slow and connecting and, you know, reflecting. It's very appropriate. I mean, it's not very, you know, at the school where we train therapists in California, we have adopted some of these mindfulness practices, of course, somatic mindfulness practice, but we also feel that there's a little bit, again, not enough collective or not enough sacredness and earth presence. So we like to work with Joanna Macy, or we like to work with the awareness of the land and rituals and celebration on the land, and this that is a little bit lacking, again, in the field of what's going on inside me. You know, it's a little, it's a bit individualistic. So
compartmentalized.
It's a little bit compartmentalized, but you know, it is important to, like Nicole said, it's very important to know oneself the best we can in order to be more collaborative in the collective.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, but it's a work in progress. I think we all keep working on ourselves as we are in the collective. Also, it's not like you don't have to be perfect before you're going to get in the collective. But it's a commitment. We have to work on ourselves in order to best collaborate and be creative together. So,
Well, thank you for that. There's a question here from Brett, which says, what do you think the best way to move forward in protecting Indigenous cultures from the possible thirst of non-Indigenous explorers, e.g. what happened with Maria Sabina after the release of Gordon Wasson's article in Life magazine?
Well, you know, I've been in touch with Gordon Wasson's grandchild, who is John Wasson, who is making a documentary on his grandfather's legacy in Huautla, actually. We're dialoguing together about that. And what happened to Maria Sabina, which was very difficult, and to my teacher too, they were very good friends, and they were commiserating together because they both were quite persecuted for having given the mushroom to the non-Mazatec people, or to the non-Mexican people, which was even worse. So they got very persecuted by the town people, really. And what happened then, I don't think would happen quite the same way now, because there's a lot more information that's circulating. There's social media, there's WhatsApp, there's Facebook. You know, everybody has a cell phone. The culture is much more modern and dynamic than it was then in the 50s. So I think that it doesn't mean that the Mazatec would be excited about their sacred medicine being commercialized necessarily and you know, disrespected at all. I mean, I don't want to say that, but they're a little more informed of what's going on in the world. So they protect their medicine. They feel the sacredness of the medicine. They keep doing what they're doing, knowing that they can't prevent what's going on the big picture in the world. It's sad. I mean, they're not very pleased with the commercialization and the absence of care that is starting to happen around mushroom or psilocybin. But they realize, they're not gonna change that capitalist culture. Is their little tribe in the mountain. They're realistic too. They see what's going on in the big world.
Okay, no, thank you for that. There's so many questions. I'm just going to whiz through a couple more. Question here: do you relate this to the mycelium communications? I think the question is the mycelium communication similar to the neurotransmission within the brain's communication?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm all over this. I mean, Paul Stamets and I, we have fabulous conversation because we're really like geeking on this together because, totally. And Louis Schwartzberg, we're like totally there because, what's going on, what the mushrooms are doing. I mean, I love that conversation. You can get me going. What's going on in the land with the mushrooms, the way they connect, the way the mycelium connect the trees with the rocks, with the river, filtering the river, creating community really underground and above ground, and the way the mushrooms are composting the toxin that are being left on the land. This is exactly what they do inside us. That's why the picture of the brain is the way you showed it, Tanya, that Robin took in London, because this is exactly what happened. More communication, more interconnection between different parts of ourselves, memories, body, spirits, emotions, relation, everything is starting to be connected when we take psilocybin.
That's the beautiful integrative nature of the medicine. So
totally. Everything becomes one experience. It's not separated. It's the holistic. That's a holistic model, right? So everything becomes simultaneously happening. All these different things are just like one experience. They're not one and then the other. It's like the same thing.
So beautiful to have that.
Yeah, right. And then the mycelium and the presence of the mushroom, is really recycling our toxicity into vitality.
Yes.
That the principle of the mushroom, how they work on the land, is really how it works on our system, on our, difficult memories, on our trauma, on our depressed state. Everything that's happening within us is not rejected. It's just transmuted. It's transformed into vitality and life. And that's very much a principle of the mushroom organism itself. And that's a very important distinction from other medicine who might be working more as purges. We know ayahuasca is more of a cleanser. So you drink ayahuasca and you find yourself, not necessarily, but the principle of purging is more inherent to that medicine. Right. And so, but the mushroom doesn't really work that way because it keeps everything and it kind of recycles all that is toxic into something that is vital. Very, very interesting.
Love that description. It's just beautiful. Someone here said something about, sorry, I just want to correct that. Someone said something about MMA and EFT. No, that's not something that we're focused on, just to make that correction. Sorry, there's so many questions here. There's a question here, can there be reference available to this model that Francoise spoke about? So Francoise, as a request, we send out a thank you to everyone, not that we haven't finished it, everyone, but there's some questions here, and we will send out a thank you note with some resources. Would you be able to provide us with maybe some brief resource that you already have available that you've created that gives some references to the model of the 5 points that you spoke about, and like a handout or something?
Sure, I can speak of it, and then maybe I can send you a few notes, and maybe you can distribute it. Yeah. So, well, one way would be to go on my website. I have online courses that really explore on level 1 and level 2 the way to explore expanded states of consciousness without medicine, going through the 5-aspect model. And I love developing those courses because as much as we are all talking about psychedelic therapy, there's a way in which, we can access expanded states with other techniques, as we know, breath work or meditation or expressive arts of movement. And I think that it's important for us to have the resource to explore those states in a safe environment and without needing a sitter or a facilitator, and really start to tap into this. So my online courses are one resources. We are putting together a whole thing with the Center for Consciousness Medicine, which is centerforcm.com. And there's a whole website with, our training, our school, I have a book club that I'm doing right now. I'm doing embodied practices sometime where people can join and be moving with me. I'm leading some movement practices. And then I have this reliefforgrief.org. It's called reliefforgrief.org. This is my parental bereaved parents retreats. So yeah, there's different things that I'm doing.
Well, we'll send us some links and we'll include them in the thank you note.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Just another question here, and then we'll just go to some final slides, and I'm gonna ask you for a final question in a moment too to think about, and I'll give you just a couple of minutes to come up with that. But what are your thoughts on mentorship with a single guide rather than joining a medicine cohort for learning? I guess that's personal, right?
Well, there are different models for that. If you have the opportunity and the great fortune of being near someone who can show you the ropes, so to speak, and train you individually and create an education for you and an experience and an apprenticeship like this is very fortunate. And I mean, I had that with Pablo, and then I had that with Julieta, but that's why, it can happen, and that's great. But it's realistically, how many guides can we train like this? Not many, so we have to be a little practical here. And how do we create actually cohorts where people learn from each other? I mean, the people I've trained, they're in cohorts of 20 or something, and they're just like, they're friends for life. They travel together, they do journey together, they exchange, they have mentors, each of them. They're really supported, and they have this sense of collective that in a way it's less isolating than just being the one person. Agree. It's great, but it's also it has limitation. It can be a great thing to be studying with a master, but it's also quite isolating. So yeah.
Well, the wonderful thing with our CPAC courses, you'll find, because I think you're doing a teaching session soon for our CPAC course, but in the first intake we had, I think, 45 students, and from all different disciplines. But now, and it's funny, they started off in their little silos, the psychiatrists and then the GPs and the psychologists and psychotherapists, but now they're like this incredible tribe, this multidisciplinary tribe. The patients in the center, they have wonderful gatherings, they connect up, they actually go on outings together, and it's really, really special to see all those healers coming together to support one another. It really is important.
And they really learn from one another. I mean, the physician can learn amazing things from an energy healer, and then the energy healer learns the more health, the psychological thing, and it's very fruitful. It's like a hive, it's very fruitful.
Lara here says, I have personal experience of fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, chemical sensitivity. Can these practices help? Well, of course, yes. And Francoise, you might want to just comment on that very briefly just before we go to the final section.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be creating a medical diagnosis or recommendation here, but it is known that, as you saw on the slide, that a lot of the rehabilitation, a friend of mine is researching in Israel, Parkinson and Alzheimer with macrodosing and mushroom, because not psilocybin, mushroom. It can't be psilocybin. It actually has to be the organic material to provide the entourage to the psilocin to create that repair in the brain better, more integrated. But there's a lot of evidence that the potential of this medicine is really rehabilitating, restoring health. essentially. So people have been talking. I mean, I have another physician here who is doing research on cancer, and is a Stanford advisor, and he says, yeah, I mean, the mushrooms are helping with cancer. They are helping with all kinds of deficiency in the physical system, because what happened is when people do journeys with mushroom, they not only rehabilitate their physical system, but they also understand sometimes the contraction from psychological memory, trauma, or spiritual depletion that contributes to their illness. I'm not saying it is the illness, it creates illness, but it contributes to the difficulty in treating. So there's, again, the body, mind, spirit axis we were talking about earlier. Once you do a work on with mushroom, you access all the different layers of yourself, of your health and your illness, right? So
yeah, and that's when you get that incredible sense of being at one with yourself, and that unleashes so much energy.
That's right.
And so much creativity to create change.
That's right.
We're just going to pop just the final slides on, and my question to you, Francoise, just to finish, is going to be, how do you see, like, what is your wish for, say, the next 3 years in this field? What is your wish? I'm going to come back to ask you, what is your, if you can see through a crystal ball, how do you see what is going to emerge in its most perfect sense, maybe? Don't tell me yet. In 5 minutes, I'm gonna.
In 5 minutes. Okay, I'll prepare my answer.
I'm just gonna show the final slides, and then we're gonna come back for your last word. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll just show just a couple more slides to finish up. So we have a wonderful psychological support service. So this is entirely legal, and this is a national service where we have psychologists, psychotherapists all around Australia who provide help with people who would like to use these medicines. Mostly they'll be doing that underground, but it's a harm reduction service. So they'll get some help with, knowing how to use these medicines safely, how to set intentions, set and setting, and so on. And also, they also provide integration support post-medicine sessions. So the ironic thing is we can't provide the therapist in the session, which is really unfortunate because it's illegal, but before and after we can. So that's a wonderful service that provides support to doctors who may have patients also who are coming to them using the medicines and needing more support, or if you yourself need more support for your own journeys. Next slide, thank you. This is Tim Ferriss's wonderful quote, and it's because of Tim really that I got into this whole field, because I read a blog of his. I didn't even know what psilocybin was. For those that know my background, you know that I've never had any drugs before 5 years ago. I don't drink. I don't even drink coffee. My drug of choice has always been singing. But Tim Ferriss opened my mind to this field and led me to have my first psilocybin experience with Syrian Rue 5 years ago. That changed my husband and my life, as these medicines do. And that's why we set up Mind Medicine Australia. Longer story, which we'll talk about further. You can read about our stories as well. And in fact, we're just about to release in October Australia's first book of psychedelic healing stories, 54 stories that have been submitted to us from a range of people. And that's going to be released in October for Mental Health Month. But Tim Ferriss says he views the next 5 years as a golden window to invest small amounts of money to affect and heal millions of people's lives. And, I really encourage you, just on the next slide, please, Alan, to help us in this journey, to share these conversations, to join our chapters, to read our wonderful Learn section, to talk to other doctors and medical professionals and your own GPs. Every time I go to a GP, I say, have you heard about psychedelic assisted therapy in my consultation with them? Many of them say, no, they haven't heard of it. And so I give them a link to have a look at our site. And then amazingly, within a month or 2 months, they start saying, oh, I want to join your courses. I want to do your CPAT training. I want to come to your summit. So they start to get very interested in this new method of healing. So it's really just opening a door, a window for people to really start to become interested in this field. And as any of you know, who, of course, you're all interested in this field, this is like a really good obsession to be interested in this field. There's so much knowledge in this space, and it's just, you know, it's just fascinating reading it all. I can never get enough of it. Also, you know, it's a wonderful and very important for us if you can support us and donate to us, as I mentioned earlier, but also you can fundraise for us. You can name us as your charity of choice for your work, you know, fundraising event. There's many, many ways you can help us, and we really, really ask you to help us because we can't do this alone. We have wonderful social media posts. Please talk to your local members of parliament. We try and talk to every state and federal member that we can to, again, educate and inform them about the data and science, remove the stigma and prejudice around these medicines, and attend our events, other events, our summit and so on. Next slide. Join your local chapter. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, please join our chapters. Or as I said earlier, if you want to start a chapter, we can provide you with all the tools that help you induct you, show you how to start a chapter in your local community. We've got a wonderful chapter manager. Next slide. And we're starting a Fundamentals of Psychedelic Assisted Therapy 4-week online course, 15th of September, with Dr. Trail Dowie and Nigel Denning, who are the course leaders of our CPAT course. And it's a very reasonable course, and we really invite you to register as soon as you can. I think over 150 people have registered so far. It's a huge demand. And of course, Francoise's courses sound amazing too. I think I'm really inclined to do one of your courses too, Francoise. Next slide. Our certificate in psychedelic assisted therapy. So intake 3 starts in February, early February next year. It's nearly full. I think we're going to start a second intake in February as well because the demand is so large. And then we'll also have 2 intakes start around about June next year. So if you're interested in this training, I really recommend you apply as soon as possible. Ilan will post some links to testimonials from our students. Many of them describe it as the best training they've ever undertaken, and many describe it as life-changing. It really is a rite of passage for many therapists to go on this journey with other therapists from diverse disciplines, as we spoke about earlier. Next slide. And check out our world-class faculty. And this is our summit on psychedelic assisted therapies. Well, Ilan, you'll have to change that slide because it's no longer in Melbourne, it's global, it's virtual. But you can see like this incredible lineup of people from around the world. It's going to be wonderful. Francoise is going to do a session with Gabor and Alberto Villalobos and others. It should be an incredible session. If you look at who's speaking, I really encourage you to attend. We have a special discount code, which I'm thrilled to give you today. It's just MMA 2021. We'll give you 10% off all the packages available for the 2-day introductory workshop, which will be with Nigel Denning, Dr. Trail Dowie, and Dr. Bill Richards. So that's for people who are interested in, you know, becoming a therapist or learning more about this as a career. But then the 2-day summit full of keynotes, hotspots, wonderful panel discussions, and many interactive technologies so you can all connect with one another. And also we're going to have some wonderful goodie bags because we've got these extraordinary supplier partners who provide us with mushroom powders and Dr. Bronner's and Panna chocolates, all made with love, and all of whom are on this mycelium journey with us, part of our tribe. Next slide, thank you. And this is some of our other upcoming events. So, you know, you can see, for example, David Nunn is going to be presenting. He's one of our wonderful supporters on the 6th of October. Also, Hamilton Morris, the relationship between sex and psychedelics should be absolutely fascinating, and other film screenings and so on. Yeah. Next slide. Or is that all the slides? I think that might be all the slides. Okay, so now I go back to you, Francoise. Just to say, would you like to come back now with your answer to my question?
Well, it's hard in 5 minutes, but I'm going to try. My hope is that, you know, I'm just going to look at my window here, but through my window, and yours, by the way, it's that we can train. We can train guides. We can train people in the art and the experience of psychedelics. So they have a very strong personal sense of that experience, that they can feel the resonance, that they can be ethical, that they can be skilled and prepared and supported. So my direction is, like you, training guides, really educating, passing on some knowledge and wisdom, and collaborating with people in the field from different angles. So we can create healing. We can really take care of each other and people. And there's a lot of suffering, like you said at the beginning. And I hope we can really create a whole body of healers who are dedicated and steeped into this psychedelic practice in a way of skillfulness. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a really, really important. I just typed that into the chat, and we'll put that in the thank you notes as well. But that's a wonderful vision, and we're really honoured that you're with us on this journey, helping our students. We just really honour who you are, what you give to this space. There is so much suffering out there, and if we can all come together and we can help to alleviate that and to create a more united, more loving, more light-filled world that really shines its light into the darkness that is on this planet, then I hope that we can all create a better world and a better future. So thank you for all you bring. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity of being with you guys. Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you. It's beautiful. And thank you all for being on our webinar with us today. And we invite you all to bring at least 2 or 3 people back to our next webinar. And so this is like a good virus that we grow, that creates healing in this planet. Thank you all for your participation, your love, your light, your support. Francoise, from our hearts, stay on for a couple of minutes if you want, as people come off. And
sure.
What time is it? What time is it there, by the way?
It's 8:30 p.m.
Okay, wonderful.
The day before you.
Yes, of course. And I'd love you to introduce me to that Israeli person you mentioned who's doing that interesting work with the mushrooms in, I think it's stroke and Parkinson's, you were saying. And
who? Where?
You mentioned an Israeli person who's doing some healing. Was it with stroke or Parkinson's or?
Yeah. There's someone in Israel doing some research on that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much. We wish you a wonderful day or evening from wherever you are in the world. And Francoise, I'm going to look forward to speaking with you very soon.
Yes.
Much love.
Thank you.
Namaste, everyone.
Namaste.
Thank you.